a week. I just took this radiator down to my local radiator shop and asked them if they could pressure test it, and the son tells me that his dad passed away in March, and he was the guy that was doing the radiator testing and fixing, and they're no longer doing it. So that's a story that seems to be a common story. People are either retiring and unfortunately passing away, and nobody wanted to carry on the work. So I've got a radiator guy down in Westchester that's probably about an hour and a half drive from here. I mean, I can easily take it down there. In fact, that's what I was going to do, because I wasn't expecting the local guy to repair this. My normal radiator guy can do it if there is actually a problem, where he should be able to do it. I don't know if he's ever done an oil cooler, but replacing the cores and all that other stuff is stuff that I take to him all the time. But before I did it, I mean, I wanted to check to see if it was actually the radiator or the oil cooler. So now my struggle is I've got to figure out how to test this myself. So on the drive back from the radiator shop, I started thinking about it, and I started getting all my pieces and parts together, because I'm going to need to pressurize. I think what the idea is, I'm going to pressurize the oil side of it, fill this radiator up this way. It should fill up. If I put the cap back on this guy, I should be able to fill the radiator up to this level of water. And if there is a leak in the oil cooler side, I should be able to see bubbling coming out of here. So, you know, I was hoping to just take it to a radiator shop, but maybe my laziness is causing me to have to do this myself. I made an adapter on my lathe, just took some plastic that I had around and just turned this down so that it would fit in here, and I could just hose clamp it in. I took the other chunk of plastic and just plugged up this side. So the plan is I'm going to hose clamp these in. This little nipple is going to go in here. I've got an old tire gauge thing that has a pressure gauge on it, which I can actually pressurize. And then what I'll do is I have my little air pressure thing that has a regulator on it. I can turn that down to, I don't want to blow up this oil cooler by overpressuring it. So I'm going to keep it under 40 pounds. It should be able to handle up to probably about 90 pounds of pressure, because it's you know, oil pressure can go that high, but usually it runs around 30-40 pounds. So I'm going to try that, and then what I'll do is I'll fill up the rest of the radiator with water and see what happens. So that's the plan so far. So good news, bad news. Good news is I now created a test rig that I can actually pressurize a radiator. The bad news is I don't think it's the oil cooler, because what you see here is I can go up to almost 50 pounds of pressure here. And what I did was I filled the radiator up to the brim with water. And if there was any leaking going on in the oil cooler side, this would have overflowed. And it's like it's staying completely level no matter how much pressure I add. Now, admittedly, this could happen when you warm it up, and it could leak when it warms up. It's a possibility. I'm considering it, like putting hot water in here and seeing if the hot water would change anything. But so far, cold, no leaks. So it's something else. So that's the bad news, because I was hoping we would have a smoking gun, but no smoking gun yet. Still working on this 365 GTC4. After I pressure tested the radiator out of the car and couldn't find a leak, I started thinking about it, and I said, well, it could be possible that this radiator could be leaking under heat and pressure. So in other words, it could be I've seen cracks in fittings that only push oil or leak when they're hot because of the expansion of metal and everything. So I didn't want to eliminate the radiator completely, because I said, you know, I want to be absolutely sure that it's not the radiator. So I put the radiator back in the car, and I also got plugs to plug up the oil lines, because what I did was, if I plug up the oil lines and I put the radiator back in and I run the car up to temperature, then if it's going to leak, I can pressurize the oil side of it with air, and if there is a leak there and the radiator is up to temperature, then I would see bubbling inside the radiator. Unfortunately, there's no leak in the radiator, so I've actually pressurized this now with my setup. I made sure there was no leaks, And you can see I've got 50 pounds of pressure here. And 50 pounds of pressure stays. It doesn't move. And everything is kind of up to temperature. Now it's cooled off since I've actually started this thing, but right now we're at 131 degrees. Now, admittedly, it was hotter a few minutes ago when I was running this thing, but it's holding pressure. And then the other problem is I started to notice that there's just a ton of more milkshake in the radiator, and I'm sitting there going, is this from just the radiators all clogged up with this stuff, or is it still making milkshake? So just to show you how much this thing has been driving me nuts, I woke up at 4 o'clock this morning thinking about this engine and trying to figure out what it could possibly be, and I came up with another idea. Since I have the oil lines blocked off, if I put fluorescent dye in the oil, which is fresh, I just put fresh oil in. If I put fluorescent dye in the engine and run it up to temperature, if there's still oil getting into the coolant, then this milkshake is going to change color in the dye. So I went to the store, I got some dye, put some in, and ran it, and it wasn't showing up. And I was like, okay, well maybe that's cool. That's a good idea. I've run it, and it's still not it's still not mixing. So maybe it is just the oil cooler, and let's go back to heating things up and all that other stuff. But then I also realized that these dye packs are designed for 5 quarts of oil, and I think I needed more dye because this engine takes 15 quarts of oil. So I went ahead and bought another dye pack, a bottle of dye, which basically is just this stuff. It just comes in a little bottle. So I put 2 of them in there. I filled up the sump with some dye. And if you look in here, let me see, I think this camera will show it, but you can see that how much it fluoresces. That's like that orange fluorescence, and it's gonna wash down in there, and it's gonna fill up and just fill it up with oil, with the dye, and run through the sump. So I ran it through. I checked the oil here, so now it's definitely mixing. And I ran the car up to temperature, and I got some of this more milkshake. I put it on a napkin just to make sure, and it fluoresces. So try as I might, I got to pull this engine out. I really tried hard not to pull this engine because it is not easy. I already pulled the carburetors out, and of course each one of them has linkages, each one of them has O-rings and gaskets and spacers and bolts and nuts, and they all have to come out. And once the carburetors are out, you have to deal with these exhaust metering pipes that are in here. They're pretty delicate. They're kind of bolted to the side of the carburetors. You can see these little stand pipes and everything. And they go into the exhaust headers, which really get in the way, so they need to come out, which, of course, anytime you deal with anything in exhaust, it's usually rusty and it's usually seized. And you've got this, breather system in here, too, that also has to come out before I unbolt the headers. So it's just a lot of work. It's a lot of time and energy to get all this stuff out. And of course I still have to take the radiator out. I have to take the air conditioner compressor out, get all that out before I even start working underneath the car. Underneath the car, I've got to pull, slide the transmission back, which means I have to take the rear end out, which, there's a lot of stuff that kind of has to come out of the way. And maybe easier to just pull the rear end because it slides back, but sometimes it gives you barely enough room to get the transmission out with the torque tube. So yeah, it starts to get complicated. But this is what I have to do because I don't think the leak is that easy. I actually looked in here and tried to look to see whether or not it was these 2 standpipes that could be leaking. Tried to pull them out and created a collet to try to pull them out, but they are good and stuck. Nothing is pulling those things out, especially leaning over the car. So I may have to take that out when I actually get this engine apart. But I don't know. I mean, that's a whole other problem in itself. And as I was leaning over the engine to try to do this, I just said to myself, you know, I'm trying to fix something that might just end up being a head gasket. So you know, we kind of resigned ourselves to the fact that the engine's got to come out. So I'm just going to keep working on this thing and do what I wasn't looking forward to doing. But that's what happens when you just got to fix a problem that that can only be fixed in this way. Well, pulling an engine out of a 365 GTC4 can be considered a mechanic struggle of the week in itself. But on this particular car, we had a real struggle. Normally, on a Ferrari, the transmission has to slide back in order to release the engine from the transmission. And that happens by sliding, because it's a torque tube car. You can see this transmission is attached to a torque tube, which encloses the drive shaft, and it goes all the way back to the rear axle. You can slide, you basically unbolt the rear mount, and you slide this this rear axle back. It has to make clearance because there's a fuel pump and everything else. So I got that out of the way and started to slide this whole unit back because it's slotted. You can get it out there, slide it back. Because what you do is you unbolt the coupler. There's a coupler inside with a spline shaft. And when you unbolt the coupler, you should be able to slide this whole unit back. Well, when I went to slide the whole unit back, the coupler wouldn't move. So this space between the torque tube and the transmission would not move because even though these bolts were undone, the coupler that basically bolts to the spline shaft at the back of the transmission was seized. I tried, you know, prying it, I tried soaking it. It looks like it's a little stuck. So what do? I mean, this transmission needs to come back so that I can get it off the back of the engine, because there's no room to slide the engine forward. The next choice I had was to basically unbolt the engine and try sliding everything back with the transmission connected, and then it cleared just enough to get the engine out and off, because what I had to do was this crossbar keeps the engine from moving forward. So I had to jack everything up and get the engine up high enough over this crossbar and this crossbar, because that's where the oil pan sits, and move everything out of the way, and then actually slowly get the engine out on an angle. So even though I succeeded in getting the engine out, the problem I have is how to get it back in, because getting this thing aligned with it still connected to the torque tube and the engine coming in at an angle, it's going to be nearly impossible to line this thing back up with the pilot bushing in the back of the engine. So I'm going to have to figure out how to get this thing unstuck. So whether I have to get a torch in there and heat things up and break loose that connector, I still have to go back and get that coupler loose. So that's the mechanic struggle of the week.